This is Sarah Bakewell's At the Existentialist Cafe, Freedom, Being and Apricot Cocktails. I'm going to read you the first page because as soon as I read this I was hooked and had to read the whole book. Chapter 1. Sir, what a horror, Existentialism, in which 3 people drink apricot cocktails, more people stay up late talking about freedom, and even more people change their lives. We also wonder what existentialism is. That's the introduction. It's sometimes said that existentialism is more of a mood than a philosophy, and that it can be traced back to anguished novelists of the 19th century, and beyond that to Blaise Pascal, who was terrified by the silence of infinite spaces, and beyond that to the soul-searching St. Augustine, and beyond that to the Old Testament's weary Ecclesiastes, and to Job, the man who dared to question the game God was playing with him and was intimidated into submission. To anyone, in short, who's ever felt disgruntled, rebellious, or alienated about anything. But one could go the other way and narrow the birth of modern existentialism down to a moment near the turn of 1932-33, when 3 young philosophers who were sitting in the Bec de Gaz bar on the Rue de Montparnasse in Paris, catching up on gossip and drinking the house speciality apricot cocktails. The one who later told the story in most detail was Simone de Beauvoir, then around 25 years old and given to watching the world closely through her elegant hooded eyes. She was there with her boyfriend, Jean-Paul Sartre, a round-shouldered 27-year-old with down-turned grouper lips, a dented complexion, prominent ears, and eyes that pointed in different directions, for his almost blind right eye tended to wander outwards in a severe extropia or misalignment of the gaze. Talking to him could be disorienting for the unwary, but if you forced yourself to stick with the left eye, you would invariably find it watching you with warm intelligence, the eye of a man interested in everything you could tell him. I like that first page because it does give a good feel of the tenor of this book, that quite gossipy conversation about Sartre and de Beauvoir and others, and it evokes time and place incredibly well. But the other aspect of another aspect of this book is that it is quite a serious philosophical treatise and talks about philosophers such as Kierkegaard and Heidegger, and I'll talk about that in a second. But then the third bit of it, and it's a real risk for a writer, the third bit of it, Sarah Bakewell talks about herself as well a bit. It could easily descend into being indulgent, but I found it very charming, and I found her a kind of engaging and interesting companion. Let me just read this tiny bit here, early on when she talks about her introduction to this philosophy or this mood, existentialism. She says, she's talking about wondering about existentialism when she was a teenager, and she said, Sartre's books changed my life, albeit in an indirect and low-key way. I somehow failed to notice the news of his death and funeral in 1980, as I failed to, although I was already a suburban existentialist by then, aged 17. I'd become fascinated by him a year earlier. On a whim, I spent some of my 16th birthday money on his 1938 novel, Nausea, mainly because I liked the Salvador image on the Penguin cover, a bile green rock formation and a dripping watch. I also liked the cover blurb, which called Nausea a novel of the alienation of personality and the mystery of being. I wasn't sure what alienation meant, although I was a perfect example of it at the time. Sarah Bakewell studied philosophy at university and then went on to begin a PhD on the German philosopher Heidegger, and he features quite a bit in this book, as one might expect. he's very much an academic philosopher, and I found following the arguments in his work, even presented in this very accessible way in this book, I found that the most difficult aspect of this book. She doesn't spare him any blushes really, and she recognises that he's a difficult writer. But what this book does so well over and again is contextualises the work without trivialising it. And she describes here how Heidegger became the favourite of the Nazis in the 1930s, and there's a lot of concern about the fact that he very willingly entered into his partnership and acceptance by the Nazis. And Bakewell says he had developed from being the nutty professor in funny clothes, writing beautiful and barely comprehensible works of genius for the few, into the official whom every student and professor would have to court. He could ruin careers and endanger people's physical safety if he chose to. Another aspect of the contextualisation, and I can't do justice to everything that's in this book at all in a short review, but another bit that I found quite fascinating and that I didn't know about was that Sartre was in prison. He joined the army, the French army, and was imprisoned in a German prisoner of war camp early in the war, and but he escaped through lax security and walked all the way back from Germany to Paris. So, you know, he wasn't just a kind of cafe academic, but he had seen physical action. And a driving force for Sartre, which he was seen as a kind of the existential maxim really, was to say, what does it mean to be free? And Sartre goes on to argue that it is every individual's responsibility to work out an answer to that and to act in good faith, or rather to avoid bad faith. And bad faith is where one deceives oneself in order to seek personal advantage or whatever, or not having the bravery to engage in that big question. And the other factor that concerns Sartre is always to see dilemmas from the perspective and through the eyes of the most oppressed. So always to look at it from the underdog's position. And in some ways, his views have embedded themselves in post-war society, and well, certainly had been, even if they're not now, had been incredibly dominant through culture and art and thought and politics. And what this book is really is a biography of an idea, a rather difficult idea, existentialism, like putting smoke in a wheelbarrow sometimes, trying to pin down what it is. But it's a biography of the development of that type of thought and type of philosophical system. But it also concludes the biographies of many of the major players along the way. So I've mentioned de Beauvoir, Sartre and Heidegger, but the others are in here as well. I can't possibly do justice to this brilliant book. It is witty, it's very well written, it's very human, it's very interesting, it makes you think, and it makes you think about where you fit in all this system as well. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's great. If you like any of my videos, could you please click the thumbs up underneath? As I'm told, this will help others get to see them. Thank you.